Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, my guests are Soo-Jin Lee and Linda Yoon. They're licensed therapists who have drawn on their firsthand knowledge of how mental health issues often went unaddressed, not only in their own immigrant families, but in Asian and Asian American communities. They're the co-directors of Yellow Chair Collective. They provide therapy to clients of diverse backgrounds with an emphasis on serving the Asian American community. Diversity and inclusion are at the heart of their practice, and they've successfully created a safe, affirming space that allows individuals to dig deep into all the pieces that make them who they are. Today, they are here to talk about their new book, Where I Belong. The book was created to help heal and to dismantle the pervasive stigma around seeking help, particularly in the Asian American community. Where I Belong includes therapeutic tools, journal prompts, and grounding exercises to empower readers to identify their strengths and resilience across generations. The book validates experiences of Asian and Asian Americans and helps them understand how they fit into the broader context of family history and the trauma experienced by previous generations. Soo-Jin Lee and Linda Yoon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Well, maybe you can start a little bit. I like to kind of let people kind of ease into the interview by just talking about themselves. And in your case, maybe how your journey into mental health practitioners manifested for you, because I think it's relevant to your work.
I guess I'll get started.
Okay.
So again, my name is Soo-Jin Lee. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. And we started Yellow Chair Collective, Linda and I, as a way of really welcoming anyone into the space of mental health world. I myself am an immigrant. I immigrated to the States when I was 10 years old with my parents and my brother. We didn't have anyone with us in the States. My parents just decided that this was going to be our new life. And one day packed up our things and came. And it was such a life-changing moment, as you can imagine, for me. But I feel like the moment that really defined this like cultural identity piece for me and questioning was actually when I moved out of Koreatown. Because when we immigrated, my parents immigrated to Koreatown, Los Angeles, which most of the population is Koreans, or at least around me. So like 90% of the people living in the apartment, including all the families and kids that I would just walk to school with, they were Korean and Korean Americans. And so I think I grew up just like once I immigrated, there was that initial shock, but I was surrounded by a lot of kids that look like me. And then we moved when I was in high school to Simi Valley, California. And Simi Valley is very different than Koreatown, Los Angeles. I all of a sudden realized that I was really different. For the first time, I realized I actually have like an accent. For the first time, I realized that not a lot of people look like me, and the values that are shared are really different. And so I think I began this journey of recognizing that I am an Asian living in America. I had a mentor at the time who was studying to be a marriage and family therapist, and she told me that maybe I should become a therapist. And I was studying art at the time, and so I didn't really know how to incorporate those things. But I became a marriage and family therapist because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And yeah. And so there's a lot of creativity in me that I like to incorporate into the work. But that's something that I realized was also missing in our community as Asians living in America, is things that we lose ourselves a little bit. Like there's a part of identity that we lose through these historical traumas, and creativity and art for me was a way for me to find that. And so that's always part of my practice now.
Okay. I'm just curious, do you do some art therapy techniques with people, or do you use, like a card sort or something like that? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. So there's definitely some actual like physical art making that happens in sessions too, which I absolutely love. And I think being in this online therapeutic spaces, it has added a lot more value to do things that are more tangible, right? The things that you can hold, especially sensory oriented things. But it can be also any other outlets of creativity. And that could mean like music, or it can even be talking about like certain shows and things like that with clients as well, right? And so we're not just focused on the trauma itself or the struggle, but it's like different ways of talking about our outlets and identity.
Yeah. So the things that make us human, basically, like creativity or art or culture. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of the times we talk about food too, which is another creative outlet that I found that I've been really like pulling towards. So Linda, here we talk about this so much, but there's a lot of, I think, with Instagram and TikTok, a lot of social media right now, there's a lot of cooking involved. Or maybe it's just my feed because I keep watching it over and over again.
I think the algorithms are this person likes this. What else can we feed them?
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm finding that I'm, watching all these people cook. And part of me is finding my ethnic self again through these cooking shows, because they're incorporating ingredients or food that I grew up with.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, what about you, Linda? Can you speak to some of the same stuff that Sujin was talking about?
Yeah. So Sujin and I, in some ways, have similar and different experiences growing up. We're both Korean Americans, and I also immigrated with my family. It's me, my dad, mom, and my sister, younger sister. We're both oldest in a Korean family. And I also immigrated around age 10 as well. For me, though, my family immigrated to San Diego suburb, where now it has changed. It's a lot more diverse. But when I first immigrated, it was predominantly white. So definitely I stood out. But thankfully, there were other immigrant kids. It was a town that a lot of Asian, particularly East and South Asian kids were immigrating. So there were a growing population of immigrants. So they had this emerging English as second language programs, and teachers had some understanding. However, this recent immigrants' families are very academically driven. And I didn't know back then, but I had ADHD. I still have ADHD, which I got diagnosed as an adult later on. That was something I struggled in Korea as well, but it was overlooked. It wasn't something that people were concerned about, but it stood out even more as I was trying to adapt to a new culture, new language, just everything new. And my parents are so just busy adjusting themselves. New work, like trying to figure out how to drive in this new country, how the systems work. And I just had a really hard time adjusting, learning a language. I had some really nice friends who we didn't speak to each other at all, but we were making motions and got to know each other. But a year after, my teacher actually told my parents that she was disappointed because my English was not a par with other immigrant kids. So I was just automatically just being compared to other immigrant kids. And I wasn't just not at their level that what they have seen. Which is now looking back, I love to talk about learning disability or ADHD in some ways a lot in the Asian American community because it's so overlooked that because of that model minority myth, having immigrants who were very having pressure to do well. So that's a story that does have we do touch on in my story in the book. But for me, mental health has been always a topic in my family, not spokenly, but like internally. Because my family, both of my parents, like they come from generational poverty they struggle with, violence they experience in the families. And we just had this big emotions that we were just not allowed to talk about. And there's just a lot of dynamics that didn't make sense. And when we moved to America, we were first introduced the concept of therapy, which did not even exist in Korea for us. And it was my younger sister, actually. One day, we were just having this big family blow up. And my sister just like crying and telling my dad bravely, like, Dad, maybe you should try family therapy. And that didn't help. That just blew even more. And then it was just like, how dare you say something shameful like that, right? And that message made me really internalize that, mental health, talking about mental health, seeking mental health is such a bad thing. So even though I now looking back had that gravitating towards like mental health work, helping professions, I felt like I had to hide it. And I chose social work as my career, saying that, I don't want to do mental health. Like, I'm going to be social worker, but I'm not doing mental health because that's such a shameful thing for my immigrant family. But one thing that's another, studying social work has a big component of mental health. And I went through my own therapy journey, found really helpful how powerful that is, how there's a gap in our families, our community, and that led me to be a therapist.
Yeah. Well, there's such a rich amount of information in the book that I could take any strand and ask a question about it, but I don't want to do that because I'm really good at diverging. I don't have ADHD, so I guess I can't really say I have a medical excuse if there's any such thing, but I do have a lot of divergent thinking but there's such really good, rich information in there. So maybe what you could do is like get to the bottom of you mentioned model minority, but maybe you can talk about that within the context of like general immigrant and Asian American and Asian history in the United States. And that's a very broad topic, so we could probably be at that with hours. But if you could maybe sum that up a little bit so that the listeners who might not understand that have a little bit more information.
Yeah. So we could definitely talk about hours on this.
Yeah.
And so let's see if we can do a good job of summarizing it.
Yeah. Well, the book does that.
Yeah, for sure. I think we have a whole chapter on just talking about the history portion because we thought that was really important to address. I think we mentioned so much about our current experiences of racial identity and racial reckoning. And that's really important because the way that our book was brought up and the way that our practice even focusing on Asian and Asian American mental health came to be after the COVID-19 pandemic had occurred. And when people started becoming isolated and not on top of that, in isolation, we were witnessing on TV all the ways that our community was being attacked. Right. All of a sudden, we were seeing ourselves in the TV where the violence was taking place. Right. And the target was me.
Right.
Imagine that. Right.
Yeah,
and all the ways that that's being impacted to us, and to sit with that alone, going to bed at night.
I had many Asian clients who expressed a lot of trauma around that and the realization of what was going on. So yes, that was definitely happening. And it was apparent, I think, to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. So on top of that, we had a lot of clients that maybe second generation that now were referring their parents to us for the first time. They have never thought about therapy. They've never thought about mental health. As Linda explained, right? There's so much stigma and shame around asking for help. But when the entire community was being targeted, they felt really unsafe to go out of their own home. So now what do we do, right? Mm-hmm. And so now we were getting all of a sudden, not only the younger generation that are being reflected and seeing themselves in being the target of the, the violence that was taking place, but they were seeing like their parents and their grandparents that were also on TV that were being targeted. They're very vulnerable, individuals that were being targeted. Yeah. And so then we start to think about all of a sudden the intergenerational piece.
Yeah.
And that this opened up the gate for us to be able to talk about, I think, the historical elements that we touch on in the book, because our parents, our grandparents come with existing traumas of violence. I think Asia is full of, well, just like America, actually, full of war in our history. And the war that has caused a lot of displacement. And these displacements led us to be immigrants and refugees here in the States. Mm-hmm. And many times, oftentimes a lot of the refugees also ended up in other places and then came to the States, right? And through these curves and journey comes with a lot of history, a lot of stories that we carry within ourselves. Oftentimes it comes with a piece of the history that tells us that we're not allowed to talk about shame. We're not allowed to talk about pain. We're not allowed to express ourselves or be ourselves, that we have to adjust, right? Really quickly. Mm-hmm. And this is all due to survival, right? And we carry that with us.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that after the pandemic, a lot of people's parents started opening up to this, like people started opening up to this idea of trauma and getting healing through therapy. Is that correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yeah, the term.
Has the population you serve grown as far as the age? Was it initially more younger people who were first generation amongst other populations you might serve at the practice, but has that grown to encompass more older people who are older?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that necessarily the term therapy, right, became more open to them. It was this idea of getting help. And to us, holistic care and wellness was part of the conversation that we were able to have, maybe perhaps directly with the older generation, but also with the younger generation as well, in helping their parents. Like, what does it really mean to help them? That might not necessarily mean, especially in the midst of COVID, when everything was happening online, sitting them down in front of a computer and try to talk to this person on the other side of the screen, right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Well, do you want to add anything to that, Linda?
No, Sujin just covered everything, so we're good.
Okay. What about this? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, Linda, I think, maybe you can talk about a little bit of like our work from before and then the switch that we had.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before COVID, the work. So Susan and I come from more community mental health background. We worked in government-run agencies, hospitals, nursing homes, social services. We have done a lot of school sites. We have done a lot of different sites where we often work with low-income Asian American clients. And then going into private practice of our own, we were told that having a practice of Asian Americans wouldn't work because not enough Asian clients seek therapy on their own. So even though that was the population that we definitely feel more connected to, that we want to work with, we kind of gave up on the idea that we will have a thriving practice, composed mostly with Asian American clients. And definitely in my early years, I had mostly white client, my first year. And then after COVID and the anti-Asian hate crimes happening, we suddenly saw this big increase of Asian American clients seeking therapy either for the first time or they're working with non-Asian therapists and they are hitting wall. They're like, they just don't get it. They don't have the knowledge or they're not able to take me to the next level of my identity work that I didn't know I needed until now. So that really made our practice really grow because we saw the sudden growth of Asian American clients seeking for Asian American therapists who look like them, who understand what was happening, who understood how you were feeling. That really escalated our practice to where we are. So there has a lot of changes because of pandemic and anti-Asian hate crime definitely started our reckoning of racial identities in the U.S.
Okay. And so that's kind of what brought people into your practice and started to grow in that direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe you can speak about this idea of model minority myth. So many people out there, honestly, I don't think most people have had a lot of exposure to multicultural concepts out in the wide world. Even if they might come from a background other than the dominant culture in the United States, right? The European culture. You might have had a bit of that in counseling classes or psychology classes, but most people probably haven't. So maybe you could kind of talk about that concept and the idea of acculturation, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't have the language when I was first immigrated, what my model minority is, but I felt it like in my body. Especially because I was in a neighborhood with a lot of recent immigrants kids who are very academically driven. So teachers had a very certain expectation. All the teachers are white, predominantly white school, and we had like handful of increasing my immigrant students from Asia, to particularly South and East. And even they didn't speak of it, like I knew their expectation put on me because I'm a Korean, and I am an Asian child.
They assumed that when you weren't at school learning, you were reading on the side for fun and profit and your academic grades. Yeah, right. They assumed a lot about you. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely assumed a lot about me and other students too, actually. My classmates were trying to copy my work, asking me, what did you answer that? Like as if my answers are always correct. And it happened throughout, middle school, high school, the expectation, not just from the teachers, but also classmates that because I'm Asian, I should be excelling in classes.
Was there also an expectation in your families to excel academically? Was that an expectation from your families as well? Pressure?
Yes, because my parents, there's a cultural aspect to Korea. A lot of East Asian countries, they are very competitive in nature because to be able to survive, to succeed. However, my parents have their own personal stories of they were not able to have proper education opportunities. And that was something that they always regret. So there were a lot of pressure to live up to their dreams of academic success they couldn't get.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mentioned earlier that my wife is Indian, and I see that that same push for academic excellence is kind of a South Asian thing as well. Because it's obvious that education can move you ahead in your social economic status, right? And that's very important. And it's more family oriented culture as well.
Definitely.
Everybody pulls each other up.
Yes. So my dad used to say, my success is a family success. My failure is, family's failure.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think around middle school years or high school years, he told me that because he was experiencing racism at his own work, and told me that, for you to succeed as person of color, you have to try 3, 4, 5 times harder than your white colleagues, white students, to be recognized. So that was kind of pressure that definitely was put on me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think Linda is starting to touch upon the racism piece. And in the book, we talk about the historical elements of the model minority myth. And we start by talking about World War II. And we started kind of talking about there because there was this whole war against communism and what communism looked like. And the war against Japan, what it looked like was Asians, right? And so for people that were newly immigrants or even just multi-generational immigrants that had been in the States for a long time that were Asian, now all of a sudden had to figure out a way to really differentiate ourselves from the enemy, right? Because that's what we were called back then. Mm-hmm. We were the enemy and we were being targeted as the enemy, right? And so to do that, as Asians, definitely just like any other racial minority group, we were aware of the racial hierarchy that just exists in the United States and anywhere else in the world, in fact, right? But being immigrants, it's a lot more apparent. And so being in this racial hierarchy, I think for many Asians, they felt like they had to differentiate. Like, if I'm not going to be at the bottom of this food chain, then I have to climb my way up. And to do that, I have to get rid of some of my identity. There were a lot of the times, this is why a lot of, people get English names, right? I don't have an English name. I decided not to get one for myself. But for a lot of Asian Americans and immigrants, when they come to the States and immigrate, they abandon their name, which is maybe hard to pronounce in English, and get new names, right? It's another way of assimilation. But the model minority myth creates this dynamic where there's differentiations between good and bad citizens. And that's what the whole, during that time, the World War II, it was really all about for survival. It was we needed to be good citizens. We needed to be a good American citizens. And in order for us to do that, we have to be law abiding. We have to be smart. We have to be, we have to hide ourselves in ways. And so I think that's what kind of built up to this whole culture that has been passed down over and over and over again to us, that we have to be the quiet ones, right? Oftentimes the model minority myth says that Asian Americans are the quiet ones in the classroom, especially with kids, right? We get that report card very often. Yeah. Or that we're really good at math, we're good at engineering, we're good at this or that, right? And it comes from this concept that has been long passed down to us, that this is what a good citizen, this is what an assimilated citizen looks like.
Right. And so a lot of people, this is probably, you could say, under the threshold of awareness or consciousness, right? It's kind of subconscious or sub-threshold of consciousness. It's all there and people are aware of it. and it creates kind of a schema or a mental map of how you function in the world, but you don't realize what it's doing to you, physically, mentally. It has to be a lot of pressure and a lot of fatigue put upon people.
Oh, yeah.
To perform and to fit in.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to address that Asian American community we're talking about as a whole, and definitely pandemic and anti-Asian hate crime brought that community identity more than ever. However, there is very diverse group as well. So some people, depends on who you ask, which ethnic group, which type of Asian you ask. Some might say, yeah, it helped me, right? That stereotype. And some ethnic groups, particularly Southeast Asian, there are more history around war, being refugees, and some poverty. They might say, really didn't help us, being grouped all together. So something I just wanted to note. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you are using kind of a global term or a general term, but yes, and there are differences in obviously both of you are Korean, so there's specifics to that culture and background and the immigrants, right? And Japanese. And the book goes into great detail about that and points out the differences. So, yeah. I'm curious, I guess most of the people you work with, and the book is pointed more to people who have been immigrants here, right, for a certain period of time. Do you ever incorporate or allow space for other than Western models of health and dysfunction or mental illness to enter into your consulting rooms? I think you mentioned it a little bit as far as somaticizing, right? There's a wonderful book by Waters called Crazy Like Us. I don't know if you've read that book. It's literally, he's a journalist who goes into detail about how Western models of healing and mental illness and health and dysfunction are kind of colonizing the rest of the world now that everything else is, structurally globalism is in place. And there's some wonderful stories in there about how it bumps up against the realities of the culture and concepts, and it literally kind of infects, if you will, or changes the cultural attitude towards health and dysfunction. But I wonder if you're doing anything to give space for indigenous concepts of health and dysfunction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I talked about the creativity is such a strong element in the work that I do with my clients. And the reason for that is because of my own background and identity, right? I talked about cooking and how does that even relate to therapy in the Western way, right?
It does.
But food is medicinal in our culture. That's the original medicine in our culture. And the way that we talk about health has to be holistic, I think, really, because the way that perhaps a lot of the older generation bring in even emotion and mental health and difficulties is through talking about their bodies. It's somatic.
Yeah.
And so the way that we approach that has to be starting with somatic and incorporating the emotions and mental health topics and discussions. And maybe it's not even explicit at all, right? But sometimes there's even words that cannot be described in English, where it just really describes a holistic way that we think about emotions in general. As Koreans, there's this word called 화병. It literally means hwa as in angry and fire. 병 means illness. Anger, illness.
Yeah, which is the Western medicine trope is that depression is anger turned toward the self rather than out, right? Is that kind of what it was getting? Is that kind of where that concept is at?
It's almost like years of unjust happened to you, so you're you have all this anger and unjust in your body that is making you so sick. And I had Korean clients come to me like, I have hwapyeong. And then I'll be like, and our psychiatrists, Western psychiatrists will be, I need a diagnose. And to give her a medicine. And when they try to put depression, and I will try to explain to my Korean client, they're like, no, that does not capture what I'm experiencing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a large part of what makes medicine work is getting the diagnosis and, placebo effect and everything. So, this is totally facetious. Maybe your psychiatrist, their psychiatrist could say it's a good pill for that.
That could have.
Dress it up a little, gussy it up a little bit. Yeah. But okay, that's I think that, and you go into that too, right? You do use a trauma model to kind of describe how emotions kind of get trapped into the body. And maybe you can kind of go through that a little bit too, because the book is full of really wonderful exercises and journal prompts. It really is, for those of you interested in it, it's either as therapists or people looking for a book to help you through some stuff. It has like wonderful prompts and good psychoeducation and techniques to kind of work through things. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I talk about, my own story of living with this migraine. And how that really was, until I became a therapist, didn't realize that was a manifestation of me holding myself in, trapping myself in so much and hiding myself so much and smiling through, social settings, pretending like I'm something else. So a part of me was always this hidden, and to have to live through that ever since I was so young, it became this headache for me, like a physical headache for me. And I didn't realize that that's what it was. And I didn't know how to relax that for the longest time, because I would see doctors and just be prescribed like ibuprofen, right? Like, what kind of other medicine or what kind of other practice would you be given otherwise if you're coming into the doctor with a headache? Mm-hmm. There is no assessment of like, where is it really deriving from?
Right. Yeah.
So we talk about this in the book of how our, traumas really live inside of our body and the ways that it's coming about. And so our exercises take us from the get-go, from chapter 1, talk about the ways that how we can sit with our body, to listen to our body, and to heal through our body throughout the book.
Yeah. Maybe you could give an example of one of those exercises or describe them.
Yeah. I think one of the ones that for sure made it from the beginning of the book should be box breathing.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to give Linda a chance to talk more.
You're trying to make me talk.
I feel like I'm just talking the whole time. So that's why I'm like, Linda, you want to introduce?
Oh, okay. Let me go take back again.
Okay.
One of the grounding breathing exercises that is simple to follow, some of the listeners may already know, is box breathing, where we kind of imagine a box in our mind and starting from 4 counts, breathing in to 4 counts, holding it for 4 counts, holding breath for 4 counts, and breathing out for 4 counts. And what's maybe a little different for our exercise is that we increase the numbers. So next time we breathing in for 5 counts, hold for 5 counts, breathe out for 5 counts, and hold for 5 counts. And then it becomes 6, 7, 8 until you're able to feel more relaxed and calm.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. But it's more or less it's aligned with also thinking about one's own trauma or stress or where you're holding things in the body. And I mean, it's very nice. Very nice.
I have to say, working with a lot of older immigrant clients who have experienced war in their country of origin, displacement, a lot of refugees, oftentimes they wouldn't say, I am feeling depressed, sad, anxious. It's more about like, I have a stomach ache that's not going away. I have a shoulder pain. I'm feeling nauseous all the time. It's always been somatic symptoms, physical symptoms, they're describing. And our job as a therapist was kind of able to pick those up, what they're saying, in physical, somatically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that is something that most people, I think people are getting better at these days. I was originally trained in hypnosis, so a lot of the history of Western psychotherapy comes out of that. It literally comes out of the history of hypnosis and what they called magnetism. But a lot of that was back when people would not be so psychologically savvy, pre-Freud. And I think a lot more people in Western countries and in America displayed those symptoms, right? Those kind of somatic symptoms, and something like hypnosis was able to kind of unrelease whatever was there, right? Like in a regression or something like that. But I think things are going back to that because it is the way people kind of manifest a lot of symptoms. They're just overlooked now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But a lot of other cultures are more body-based and somatic-based and more understanding even of what's going on in their body, and things manifest that way, I think, more what we would call psychosomatically.
Right.
But there's just more of an awareness of it, right? It's not that it has gone away. It's just called something else, I think. And it's good that you're actually using a lot more of that body awareness and connection to the self that way.
Yeah, because some clients, especially older immigrant clients, because of the shame they learn about mental health symptoms, right? They will deny they are depressed, feeling depressed, or they'll deny they're feeling anxious, but they'll tell us, we are having all these body symptoms. So, yeah.
And now you probably see a lot of remarkable stuff happen when you address it that way.
Yeah, definitely. We try to, with older immigrants, we try to use terms that are more easy for them to receive, and if they're not really perceptive, if they're not as open to talking, some are not. We will help them to connect to more holistic care, whether it is more of a body movement, exercise, Tai Chi, acupuncture, other avenues of care they are more familiar with and more open with, that we try to connect them with.
Okay. Well, that's excellent. I mean, I'm so happy that you're there, allowing people to be themselves culturally and to connect people with that. Do you find that a lot of like second generation or even people who come from Western background? I mean, I assume you probably still also you heal people. You don't heal. Mm-hmm. You don't heal people of particular backgrounds, right?
We definitely still see diverse clients.
Yeah, and so you find that people who are more Western background or people who have been more assimilated into American culture, do you find them more open to more holistic ways of working now?
I definitely have seen more openness, more curiosity around Eastern medicine, Eastern healing modalities than, any of us started our journey of career in mental health. Yeah, definitely been amazing. Some people bring it up and they want to they want to integrate into their treatment plans as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because with the older generation, we're working from the body and then introducing the thoughts and emotions, right? Mm-hmm. And then with the younger generation, it's like the other way around. They come with the mind, right? So many thoughts, and then we work into the body.
Right.
Either way, it's like integrated, right?
Yeah. Excellent. Good. Well, is there anything else? We're coming at about the top of the hour here. We can go on a little bit longer. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you think is important that you'd like to express about the book or your work in the practice?
I think I would love to introduce like how our book came to be.
Yeah.
So Linda and I are not Like we didn't imagine ourselves to be writers. We're both immigrants, right? English is our second language.
Well,
And
you did a good job fooling me. It's
thank
very
you.
well, it's a well-written book. So yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
But the way that it wasn't even that we thought about writing a book and we, got started on it. It wasn't even our idea to begin with. We are really just clinicians. And in the midst of COVID and all of the inquiries that were rising, right, for therapy services, we realized that we really needed to create a community space, because we were having this parallel journey of trauma together with our clients. And so we started creating these support groups. And initially, it was just these one-off community workshops that we were doing. And then it built into a support group, because once we started having conversations with the community around what was happening, we needed to have a little bit more psychoeducational components to these elements. We can't just continuously be exploring the emotions. It doesn't lead anywhere, really. So we needed to have an element of psychoeducation as well as processing that occurred. Yeah. And so we had this whole curriculum built for a support group. And then an agent, literally agent, reached out to us and said, that curriculum should be a book. So then we started thinking about, you're right, the way that we're describing what is happening, right? And the trauma work that we're doing in order for us to reach more community members. And we wanted to make it a lot more accessible in order for that to happen. We thought a book would be a really great way to do that.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a heavy undertaking. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I know the curriculum was probably a little less dense as far as a history of things, but you're going for helping people clinically, but still, that's a lot of work to specifically in this area, probably from the ground up, because it just wasn't there, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of this is a breakthrough moment for a lot of things. With that in mind, have you heard from other clinics around the country, like in Chicago or New York or anywhere else, wanting to use this or kind of unpack it, kind of reverse engineer the way the book was, go back to the roots of it as a curriculum? Are you planning on producing a curriculum from it, or have you heard from people who are using the book?
We have talked about perhaps having a guidebook along with the book that we have in the future. But currently, we have been reaching out to professors that we know in Asian American studies, ethnic studies. So we've been exploring that area, and we are hoping to start our own support group based on the book as well. And we will be really open to having other groups, other organizations who want to use our book as a guide for discussions or support groups. That will be really amazing. We really want the book to start a conversation on Asian American racial and intergenerational reckonings.
Well, I mean, like here in Chinatown, obviously, I don't think there are a lot of therapists in Chinatown, but I'm sure that, there are a number of Asian American therapists, for instance, in a city like Chicago that could do outreach or start a support group, right? It's similar to the one you did, where it could grow to something like it would be a community. And also, I have actually gone to them. There's some wonderful herbalists and acupuncturists in Chinatown and around the city where that could be incorporated into the whole process, right? Or whatever, in the Korean section of Chicago or
We actually have connection with Asian American mental health professionals group in Chicago called CAATCH. And we have been in communication of how we can make some collaboration and partnership happen with our book.
What's the name of the organization?
CAATCH. I believe it's spelled CAATCH.
2 A's.
We have spoken to the founder not too long ago.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, CAATCH.
Oh, CAATCH. Okay.
Yeah. And since Scott, you're in Chicago, feel free to use them as a resource if you want to drop the link.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will put the link in there for CAATCH. No, I think it's good work. I think it's super important. I think that the integration of different models of healing, and that's how you actually do it anyway. I'm of the opinion that every time you see a new patient, you have to come up with a new theory of personality for that individual and come up with a new therapy for that individual. It's so the same thing as the cultural factors are huge too. So I support your efforts very much so.
Thank you. Yeah. I hope that a lot of therapists will also pick up this book as a way of learning for themselves, like what it really means. Because like you mentioned, the book really is not just psychoeducational. There's a lot of personal stories in there. And even if you're just reading through the stories, you will learn so much about the experience of the Asian and Asian American experiences and how that sits with our clients.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, anything else you'd like to add before we sign off here?
No. Do you have information to the pre-sale of the book?
Oh, it's a pre-sale. Oh, no. Send me the link. Send me the link for the pre-sale. It's not available yet. I feel honored to actually have a pre-sale copy of it. Yeah. So, yes, please send me the link and I will add that into the show notes and any other links. The link, I'll obviously put a link to your to Yellow Chair Collective and to the book, of course. But anything else do you think I might need there?
Yeah, our publishing date is January 9th next year.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'm avant-garde. I'm well ahead of the pack here. Well, okay. Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon, thank you so much. I wish you all the best for the book. I think it's a great book. I think any clinician out there should pick it up. And anybody who's interested in healing should pick it up too.
Well, thank you so much for having us and having this conversation today.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you too. Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.